diverse set of behaviours.
He Māori aho.
Your single source of truth.
Here's some colours in it.
My husband is Samoan, so talofa.
Ngā tikanga reo tikataki.
Che Guevara of New Zealand's Parliament, Chloe Slaughter.
Three houses.
And it's communist.
He whakatūpu.
They've got mother, running holidays.
Tēnā koutou, anō, nau mai hara mai, e ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā kā rangaranga maha. Nau mai hara mai ki te kōrero o tēnei ahi pō. Welcome everybody. This is a repeat. We just tried to deliver the stream, but unfortunately, little did we know we weren't live. So if you caught a little bit of our live before, we're just going to re-deliver so that we can have the story uploaded to YouTube. Aroha mai, if you're re-hearing some of this, it was just a warm-up and just trying to, get those messages instilled in the hinengaro ne. Ka pai. So tonight's story, we're mainly going over the school lunches. Ka pai?
And the health sector and the privatization agenda more generally.
Ka pai. It's quite a deep dive, but yeah, it's... for me, the biggest thing is that this has been going on for so long. Such a notorious company, the Compass Group, who has been given these contracts. To me, it smells like corruption, right? It smells like purposeful sabotaging of our public services so that they can be privatized. I'm looking forward to hearing this again. I hope y'all get something useful out of this. For me, it just says that we really do need to look after our public services. And it's one of those less attractive or less exciting kind of spaces. Look at all the submissions for the Treaty Principles Bill, right? But the types of deals and things that go on in back rooms just in our public services in general is really astounding. And the types of groundwork that these people and groups do to disassemble these services, it's really, it's just staggering. So I mihi to all of those working in our public services at the moment. It must be an incredibly hard thing, and I really encourage the rest of us to get in behind them as much as we can. So without further ado, I shall throw it over to my lovely co-host, Samah. Over to you, Modi ora.
Modi ora. All right, let's get into it. So, transferring public money into private hands. This is what I think the real story behind the school lunches are. It's about the greater privatization agenda and more generally, how do we get money from everyday Kiwis, workers, into the hands of corporations and the ultra-rich. So, forcing the disgraced catering and services company Compass on our children is part of a larger campaign to transfer money from people to corporations. This privatization agenda is served with a side of psychological warfare to divide our communities and convince us we deserve the punishment. That's what I think Luxon was doing when he said, go and make a Marmite sandwich. Obviously, these narratives, he doesn't just come up with them on the spot. These are thought about, rehearsed, and presented to him by his managers. And, the question is why? They want to transfer the conversation from being about, the quality of school lunches, or even better for me, if the conversation was about, the privatization and giving the contract to such a well-known, terrible company above empowering our own people, our own communities, our own local businesses at the very least to provide those services. And so they'd rather avoid those conversations and instead make it a conversation about personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important for them to continuously do that because the only way the public can go along with everything that this government is doing with their neoliberal policies is if we believed in the myths behind neoliberalism. And one of the biggest myths about it is personal responsibility, and he wants in people's minds, the National Party wants in our minds to be thinking, do these people even deserve it?
Mm-hmm.
Are they even worthy? See how that has changed the conversation to talking about the worthiness of people instead of talking about government decisions and government's inability to provide a service that they already promised that they would provide.
Yeah, I mean, what happened to everyone understanding that we're in a cost of living crisis? you know? And this is a conversation about poverty, but just the nonchalantness of how he's just brushing it off to turn it into instead a debate about personal responsibility. It's just crazy. Like if you're going to run a service, run it well. And if your intention is to run it into the ground, like, you know, I think their intention is clearly to run it into the ground, so that we start opting out even, just to make the program unpopular. But, you know, if you're gonna run a service, run it properly. Don't set it up as a booby trap to just be a debate about personal responsibility. If you want to have a discussion about personal responsibility, then let's have it. Just give the kids some food while we have it. Some good, nutritious food that's going to give them what they need so that they can actually learn at school.
And that's the point that many principals have made. It's the fact that you've already agreed to provide the service. You've already entered into a contract. You're giving these people $85 million. You should expect them to provide the service well, right? And it reflects badly on the government too, if they're happy to let companies just renege on the contracts that they signed with them. And principals also said, you know, a lot of the parents can make a Marmite sandwich for their children, but they are sending their children with the knowledge that they're getting lunch that day at their school. So they're not packing lunches because they think the lunch will arrive. And so children are going to school with no lunch packed, thinking they're going to receive lunches. Obviously, when the school lunches don't show up, or they show up at the end of the day, there's no chance for parents to go and give their children Marmite sandwiches. So it's about the fact that they are anticipating that the lunch is going to be there. And if they knew the lunch wasn't going to be there, they might put lunch in their students' lunch boxes. So again, it comes back to the idea that this is a service you've said you were going to provide, so you should provide it so everyone can act accordingly. And it's funny that they're absolutely shameless, like absolutely not even ashamed of the fact that as a government, they are letting the biggest catering corporation in the world just screw them around and renege on their contract on a daily basis. You know, these guys, they like to act like they are, you know, business savvy. But if you're business savvy, you would never allow another business to renege on your contract like that. So it's funny for me. It goes against their own identity, but such is the neoliberal worldview, full of contradictions, as Elizabeth Rata likes to say. Okay, so
man, they're cheap salesmen. It's totally on brand, you know.
Yeah, this part especially thought it was cruel. He said to reporters that for many people, a loaf of bread, some jam, and a piece of fruit isn't, quote, rocket science. So what he's saying there is that people who don't give their children some bread and jam and a piece of fruit are stupid. And, you know, obviously that's ignoring the realities of life. It's also just completely pointless. If you go around insulting parents that aren't providing lunch to children, it's not going to change the material reality for children at all. But I'm interested in the psychological warfare aspect of it. Him telling us that we're stupid. That's why we're in poverty. I think that it's very important for a colony, for, you know, a capitalist state in general, to constantly convince us that we deserve the suffering that we receive, that we are in a bad situation because of our own doing. It's that meritocracy thing again, right? But society would not put up with this level of mistreatment if we valued ourselves as individuals. And so it's necessary for the government to make, you know, the majority of the country feel like they're not worthy of having a comfortable, stable life. And that is necessary. Otherwise we would revolt, right? And so that's what I think is part of what they're doing here, calling people who don't give lunch to their children stupid, and also dividing our communities. And you see, notice the way that he said, we all back in the day used to get Marmite sandwiches. It's like, is that really true? Is it really true that a wealthy family and the wealthy families around Luxon all just gave their children Marmite sandwiches like a normal working class family? I think he's trying to identify with other working class, middle class, and poor families in the country to say, I'm just like you. And just like you, I also got, you know, bread and jam and trying to grow a divide between working families that do give lunches to their children and families that receive free lunches. They want these families that they're appealing to think, that's true. It's not that hard to put some jam on pizza. I do it every day. How come I'm paying for schools to do it for parents who aren't doing it, you know? So they want to turn us against each other instead of us uniting with each other against these exploitative systems and private industries. He wants that attention to be turned on each other.
And I think, you know, it's not rocket science. He's trying to paint people who are not providing those lunches as stupid, so that, you know, to demonize those people and then to justify the program being shit.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, look, these people are stupid. They've made their bed and they're, you know, got a lie in
They
it.
deserve to suffer.
Yeah, and they deserve a shit program. Look, these people are stupid, so we're going to give them the bare minimum program because they're not doing enough for themselves. So they get the bare minimum. And even them complaining about the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
how dare you complain about free food is what we hear back. And, you know, Seymour is playing along these same lines when he says that Muslim students don't deserve halal certified food, that it's not a justified expense. Again, it's part of the contract. You're meant to be a business savvy government. They should be able to live up to their contract, which should presumably include being able to provide food for a range of students. So again, they're just being terrible, shitty businessmen, but trying to punish us for our poverty. And as Pere says, it's about convincing us that we deserve our poverty and making us suffer. And, you know, there is a sadism to it, and they're appealing to people's worst instincts as well through doing this. They're appealing to other people's sadism and their ability to put the blame on poor people, you know. And, you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? They didn't serve halal food for Muslim students. They gave non-vegan food to vegan students, something that's often left out when people list all the issues of Compass.
Too woke.
Food is turning up late or not turning up at all. It's burning students and so on and so forth. And yeah, the idea is that poor people deserve shit services, and that's part of setting the groundwork for destroying our public services. Because if you think about that rationale, that can be extended to every single public service, right? Well, if you're poor, that's on you, and you should deserve to suffer. Why should we help you with, you know, insert public service here? You know, if you're poor, why should you get the same level of quality healthcare as if you're rich? It's not rocket science to save up a few dollars to pay for operation, you know. That same logic can be extended. Now, let's get into the story about this lunch program and how I think it's about passing money to private corporations. So, school lunch program. Local jobs to go as government hands $85 million catering contract to overseas company. The $85 million contract was won by the School Lunch Collective led by global catering company Compass Group. More than 150 food suppliers and up to 2,000 across the country could lose their job as a result of these changes. So that's a massive number of people and a lot of businesses, 150 businesses. And they're going to lose their jobs, lose their contracts, potentially lose their business. In any other situation, I feel like this would have made headlines. You know,
That's a lot of jobs.
That's, you know, usually it's like 20 people lose a job in a factory and it makes the news, but they never centered this aspect of the story, that it was about people losing jobs, and hyper focused on the quality of food, which matters, of course. But I think this is the bigger story behind it, and is the root cause of the issue, is that they gave a contract to this giant, famously bad catering company instead of local suppliers that are beholden to their community. They live with them, right? They are providing food for their neighbors. They're providing food for their own kids. So there's that incentive to do a good job. And also because they're care about their local business and they want their community to come and purchase of their business, so they need to make sure it's good. But Compass is purely a catering company, and they get their massive multi-million-dollar contract from governments, neoliberal governments that don't give a shit about people. So they don't really care about the quality of their food and their reputation. So it's clear that this is the path that was going to go down. If you move it from 150 small-time local suppliers to one collective led by the biggest catering company in the world. On top of that, these catering companies had just gone through a performance management plan by the Ministry of Education, following complaints about food quality and service. And the owner of one of these local businesses that lost her contracts, Kelly, said, how can we lose a contract when we did a good job? We were never under performance management and all of our schools liked us. To companies that have done such a terrible job, Kelly asked, they've created a monopoly. And she's absolutely right. They've created a monopoly in terms of school lunches. But the thing is that this monopoly has been going, we've been heading down this road of monopolizing our food catering in this country to the Compass Group specifically for a long time. And both Labour and National have contributed to this. So how do they justify all this? How do they justify cutting 2,000 jobs and 150 businesses and creating a monopoly out of Compass Group? Savings. They say that they're going to save $130 million because they've dropped the food prices to $3 per meal, right? But these promises, they never stack up. You look at the history of when they've come in and say, well, we're going to slash this, slash that, because we're going to give you savings. There's always hidden costs. In this case, it's already coming out. School lunch program pushing extra costs into high school, principal says. So previously, the lunch provider was also in charge of dropping the food off to the student directly and then taking the rubbish away. Now schools have to do that. And this particular school had to employ 5 people working 4 hours a day to help set up and tidy up. And the interim funding of $210 a day until the end of term 2, and that won't even cover the hours needed. So on top of this cost, this school is spending $210 every single day, a cost that was previously covered by the school lunch providers. And they say rightly all that happens there is the reduced cost to provide the lunch assistance shifted back onto the big schools. So in that way, the government is able to funnel the money from a very important public service into private corporation, and has made it more expensive for these already struggling schools, right? Because this program is meant to be aimed at schools that need the support, and they've made them cover these extra costs. And so the quality of schooling is going to go down because they're now spending money on this when they should be spending it on education. Compass gets this massive job. Local businesses are lost. The government spends less money on school lunches, which gives them more money that they're able to give to people like landlords through tax cuts. So that's what I mean about shifting the money from the public realm into the private realm. Another way that there are hidden costs in this, the reviews that they do, right? So we already had a performance management previously, just the year before they got the contract. That costs money. Now the Education Ministry is doing an investigation on the school lunches, and they're saying that they're going to expand this investigation after a schoolboy unfortunately got some serious burns from a lunch spilling on his legs. So, you know, firstly, I think it's funny that they're doing an investigation because we have already had an investigation on Compass Group's food. We literally had it the year before, but we've also had it previously, and we've had it a million times across other countries. So it's not like we need to, you know, it's that constant delay tactic, right? Oh, we have to investigate the abuse at Oranga Tamariki, you know, 10 years later. Oh, we've got another review in Oranga Tamariki 10 years later.
Yeah. Oh, create another working group. Don't worry, we're working on it.
Exactly. And so it's this endless game, and that's what they're playing with Compass. We don't need an investigation. We know that they're shit. But on top of that, this investigation is costing taxpayer money. So the $3 thing, it's not accounting for the fact that schools are now paying for setup and cleanup costs, and it's not accounting for the fact that MPI is doing investigations. As part of this investigation, the Ministry of Education said that they told Compass, I find this hilarious, because Compass is the biggest catering company in the world, all right? They should know what they're doing. I think I read that they feed 1 billion meals every year.
Wow.
So Ministry of Education had to contact Compass and tell them these particular types of packaged meals cannot be served again in the program, as they were never intended to be reheated in a commercial oven.
Ugh.
And these guys, they didn't know that. And so they were
Incompetent.
heating it up, and it was holding its heat, the packaging, and it was burning students. And they don't even know that. It's just like the height of incompetence. And then we also directed the School Lunch Collective to publish visual evidence daily of the quality of meals produced across all kitchens, and to publicly report on delivery performance and meal surplus. Okay, who's going to check these daily pictures, right? Who's going to check on their performance? All of that is taxpayer money that we should be calculating into these $3 a meal cost-cutting measures that are going to end up costing us even more in health, but even financially. Now, I just wanted to really quickly go through some of the big scandals that Compass Group has gone through. There are so many, there's no way that I'm going to be able to read through all of them, but just some of the major ones. So they started in 1941, providing food, factory canteen food, to munitions workers, so people who made weapons during the war for Britain. And so you can see that their mentality has grown off that, right? This idea that we feed people because we want to keep them productive. It was after a government policy that said you have to at least give them 1 meal a day, these munitions workers. It makes them a little bit more productive when you're not starving them. So they come from this mentality of survivalism, right? In war, and providing food for weapons factory workers, and, you know, probably cutting costs as much as possible because they were putting all the money into war. And this company continued to exist after that, despite the war coming to an end. So they had to create the situation for them to exist. And that's what a lot of time happens with private corporations when they come up, you know, are born out of a certain situation, and then they have to find a way to continue existing. So just along those lines with war, you know, the mercenary companies that were formed around then, after the war ends, these companies still need to be contracted to a war. So then they start lobbying for continued war. And so same thing with this company, Compass Group, they will then start lobbying for governments to provide contracts to them instead of to local communities, because they need to justify their existence. Like all capitalist organizations, they need to continue growing. So that's their history. And it's been filled with scandals, right? You can even search up Jamie's school campaign from 2005. I didn't end up adding the video here, but he does.
Jamie Oliver. Wow.
Yeah, Jamie Oliver. He did this whole campaign against Compass Group's subsidiary at the time, Scholarist, who was providing food, lunches for Britain. They were providing this apparently infamous food in the UK called turkey twizzlers. And Jamie Oliver was going around schools and trying their lunches and seeing how shit they were. And he realized that these turkey twizzlers were only 30% turkey. And the rest was just like pork fat and other additives and stuff. And so he campaigned to remove turkey twizzlers. And they did in the end remove them. But these guys, they just created another subsidiary who's now providing lunches in the UK. So the structural issue continues. But that's how infamously bad these guys are, that even Jamie Oliver has a program about it. They've had to settle for attempting to bribe a UN official to get a catering contract worth $350 million. So they're horrifically corrupt, and, you know, take from that what you will, right? They're willing to bribe officials. That's just a fact. They've been done for serving food with traces of listeria bacteria in prisons in Canada. So listeria bacteria, I'm pretty sure it's found in the intestines of animals. It's related
Comes
to...
from E. coli, so E. coli contamination.
Oh, okay.
But how sad in prisons, right? So it's like what? Lower food standards for our prisoners? Wow.
Yeah, so they don't have options, right? Much like the school children who
Mm.
go to school with no lunch. Prisoners have, even less options, and they're poisoning them with animal shit or bacteria from animal shit. But they've also had issues in many schools. In 2011, inspections for one of their subsidiaries found 18 notable health and safety violations serious enough to cause food poisoning in London schools. In 2013, they failed to declare that they put horse meat in their burgers for school children. And these burgers had up to 30% horse meat in them. And they're also terrible to their workers. So Unite, which is one of Britain's biggest unions, called them Britain's most heartless employer. So they've been famously bad at making food and famously bad at treating their workers. They, send them off without their redundancy pay and force them to fight in court for their owed salaries. And yeah, like I said, they don't care about their reputation. They don't care that they get done for these serious violations, because for them, the contracts they get, like the $85 million one from the government, can pay for all these lawsuits. It can settle all of these lawsuits outside of court and just continue business. And for them, it's worth it. It's worth it to continue providing substandard food for the cost cutting that they do. And another thing on that cost cutting thing is that Compass Group's income has grown over the past few years in New Zealand as we've gone through the so-called cost of living crisis. As food prices went up with inflation, their profits went up as well. And one of our reporters, I forget his name, Aotearoa, but he contacted them and he asked them, is this because you've chosen to use lower quality food? And Compass refused to answer them, but he did dig out one of their speeches recently where their CEO said exactly that. We're moving to lower quality ingredients to cut costs. So it's about the ingredients that they include, the mass purchased ingredients that they produce, that they include in their food. And that's probably a big part of why it looks like one big mush, because when you do get low quality ingredients, it pays to mix them with a lot of stuff to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why Compass does so well despite everyone else struggling. Now, despite all this, despite this extremely long history of being terrible food providers and being terribly corrupt and feeding children horse meat and so on and so forth, in 2014, the national government started making its moves to shift all of our hospital food into the hands of Compass. At that time, Compass supplied more than 40% of hospital foods already. It was already a major player, probably the biggest player at that time, right? And at that time, and this is, this is a very sad story, at that time, the Auckland DHBs operated their own food service in-house. But under the proposal, Compass Group would take over the operation. So they had their own kitchens, they had their own operations. They
Food
were doing,
sovereignty.
a great job. But boards were encouraged to enter into the negotiated 15-year contract with Compass at their own pace, and many are doing so. So of 20 DHBs, the majority didn't end up signing up, but 7 of them unfortunately did. And now I don't know what the government did to pressure the DHBs to doing this, but there was definitely some kind of pressure. Because you look at this Otago Daily Times article and they say that they found out that this proposal was happening. They contacted members to ask them how they were going to vote. And as soon as they received that, correspondence from Otago Daily Times, the members were emailed copies of the Code of Conduct with the relevant section highlighted in yellow saying no board member, elected or appointed, is allowed to discuss the upcoming board or committee matters before a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So they were being very secretive, very shady about it. Councillors couldn't even talk to the media about how they planned to vote. The vote to be taken behind closed doors at a meeting will determine the future of kitchen workers in Dunedin and in Invercargill. So at the time, it was the Southern DHB, they called it, and it looked after Dunedin and Invercargill hospitals. The Otago Daily Times continues, says, rumbling away for more than 2 years, largely attracting little attention, the proposal was the brainchild of the government's Health Benefits Limited, the soon-to-be disestablished entity whose work has been controversial, at times troubling to the DHB sector. Now, this is a massive understatement. This group, Health Benefits Limited, was a creation of National. They made it in 2010, and they did it to basically restructure and destroy what they can of our public health services and to privatize what they can. For example, moving the catering from in-house, people doing the business themselves, not spending any extra money to third parties, and transferring into the hands of the terrible company Compass. This is how it was described at the time, Health Benefits Limited. A leaked document a document leaked to RNZ says the government's flagship health initiative, Health Benefits Limited, has striking similarities to a Ponzi scheme and is the single biggest threat to the public health system in a generation. That's how bad this group was. And listen to this next excerpt from an interview with RNZ. I think like maybe this is back when journalists were a little bit better, because this journalist did a great job of summarizing the issue, and you'll see how it works by, again, sucking the money from our public services.
And the reference to the Ponzi scheme, what's that about?
Yeah, well, the document says that HBL is requiring real investment from DHBs with a promise of great returns. It's basically saying tens of millions of dollars is being taken from DHBs and given to HBL to fund operational and project costs, and millions more will be invested with the promise of savings across the health system. But in reality, DHBs haven't been able to recognise any benefits at all.
They haven't been able to recognize any benefits at all, but they were pressured into giving millions of dollars into this Ponzi scheme, Health Benefits Limited. Eventually, it was closed down, not because it was terrible. I would argue it was because they finished their job. They restructured what they can. They did what they think they can get away with, right? And by the end, so this group was established in 2010, and said that they would find $700 million in savings. In the end, they only managed to make $71 million in savings. So again, terrible business people. Can't be trusted to deal with economic things. But yeah, it's an absolute joke. It's an absolute joke. Just like the school lunch program, they say they're going to do big savings, but we always find out in the end that they don't even make the savings that they promise. But by then, of course, it's too late. The damage is done. In the case of the hospitals, a lot of them entered into these 15-year contracts with Compass to provide the food for their hospitals and, you know, destroyed the ability to provide food for themselves. None of the Auckland hospitals now provide their own food. In the case of Dunedin, they were especially proud of their kitchen. There's articles about it that you can see. They didn't just serve, you know, there's like a joke about how terrible hospital food is, right?
Yeah.
They wanted to go against that, bless them. And they wanted to actually treat their guests, and they gave them like fancy food, you know, they gave them creative meals. They actually put a lot of love in it. And we're very proud of this, and these guys just had to destroy it, right? They can't stand anything beautiful. They can't stand our communities being able to protect and look after ourselves, because how can you make profit from that, right? So, you know, the way that we headed the title of this episode and the last one, colonizing the colony, that's what we mean by that. These organizations that we're talking about, the hospitals and the schools, they're already under colonial management, and they're still trying to extract whatever wealth they can. So they're looking for any service that the people provide to themselves directly. They want to come in the middle of that and put the middleman that they want us to hire to provide those services. And that's the way that they're basically making money out of thin air. Because if we did this directly to ourselves, there wouldn't be that need to pay someone. If there wasn't that profit motive for the catering company, then they wouldn't need to lower the quality of their food so much and so forth. So people doing it at cost, cooking for themselves, changing to this private corporation, doing it for a profit and doing a terrible job by it. That was the work of the Health Benefits Limited. Okay, let's just put that to the side for now. We're going to come back to these guys. At the time, massive protests. People did not want that. Auckland didn't want that. The South Island didn't want that. People protested all up and down the country. They said that there was going to be job losses and a drop in the standard of food if it was outsourced. They were ignored, and the Southern DHBs and the Auckland DHBs agreed to contract to Compass Group. And of course, everything the union said turned out to be right. There were job losses and the food quality dropped. The union kept trying to fight. They did their absolute best. They wanted to take legal action against them. And, you know, what was worse is that the meeting where they had the decision-making meeting about whether to give Compass Group the Southern DHB's contract, they excluded the union, but they invited Health Benefits Limited and Compass Group. And, you know, the union rightfully called it an insult when they were told by Otago Daily Times that Compass and HBL were invited. They didn't even know. And they said they weren't even interested in our counter proposal, but they wanted to spend more time with HBL and Compass. That's the attitude that our government has towards unions. They prioritize the interests of the wealthy, of corporations, of their own friends that run Ponzi schemes, over unions who represent workers. Nothing's changed since then. We know with Brooke Van Velden, she doesn't want to meet with unions. And as we're going to talk about soon, the government's been dissing the unions who are speaking out about our health service. Now, of course, as they do, the ministers gaslit the union, gaslit the people who go to the hospital, gaslit the workers, and everyone complaining about the food. He held his own PR photo shoot where he tried the hospital food and said it was amazing. The same thing David Seymour did, right? It's all just a repeat. That's the thing that I found out through researching the story, is that it's just Groundhog Day. It's just Compass Groundhog Day. We've been through this whole saga with the hospitals. They had to do the same PR thing of go and pretend to try and like the food. They said it was to cut costs, which didn't end up cutting costs. It's all the same thing. Of course, gaslighting aside, the poor quality hospital food continued to be a safety issue. And next we have this video from John Campbell that just sort of summarizes the issue of the time, and just again to show that this really was a really big issue at the time. And that's why I'm like surprised that the media isn't harking back to the story. You know, Compass, who famously destroyed hospital foods around the country, or Compass, who was protested against across the whole country in 2016, they're not framing it, they're not contextualizing. It's like Compass has popped out of nowhere.
Totally. These money savers just popped up out of nowhere to save
Yeah.
us some money. Woo!
Yeah, which, you know, and you look at the past history of when they've done this, it didn't end up saving the money that they said it would. So, you know, there's a reason to question what they're saying. And that comes with putting things in context, which, you know, I'm always saying on this show, colonialism is about erasing context. So that's their whole shtick. But watch this John Campbell video.
A group comprising Grey Power Southland, Unions Southland, Unions Otago, the Labour Party, the Green Party and New Zealand First are calling for the Southern District Health Board to end Compass's contract to provide hospital meals in the far south. The call came this afternoon after weeks of complaints about food quality. Until this year, meals were made in-house, and food at Dunedin Hospital in particular had been widely praised for its good-to-eat quality and nutritional benefits. But as a money-saving move. Compass won the contract and now ships food down to the Deep South from the North Island. Described on a scale that's included terms such as revolting and disgusting, the food's been defended by Health Minister Jonathan Coleman, who even ate a meal himself in Dunedin Hospital.
That's
Critics said
fine.
it wasn't the food. Patients are being served. And now, according to Anna Huffstutler, a spokesperson for this broad-based new coalition, enough is enough.
Okay, so wait, go back. Who's in this coalition again? Let's just hear that. It's important.
A group comprising Grey Power Southland, Unions Otago, the Labour Party, the
Labour.
Green Party and New Zealand First. They're calling for the Southern District Health Board to end Compass's contract to provide hospital meals.
Okay, so Labour, New Zealand First, everyone came together to say Compass is terrible. We should take them out of our hospitals right there. Very aware of how bad Compass is. Just keep that in your mind. Just wanted to add that Compass was also terrible to their workers, as we'd expect. And similar to other countries, they didn't give them their gratuity pay, which was worth around $30,000 because they'd worked at that kitchen for ages and they deserve this. They earned this pay, a gratuity pay, it's called, at the end of their service. And they didn't give it to them. It was $30,000 each. They had to fight for it. So, you know, also predictable because we know their history as terrible, heartless employers.
Mm-hmm.
The protests kept going. This issue kept going. That's the thing. This issue kept going for a long time. People kept protesting it. People kept having problems with the bad quality of food, and especially, you know, in Dunedin, because they knew what they'd lost. They knew what they'd gone from, this amazing, incredible service, to now Compass. And so, you know, someone in the comments called it slop, and that's what these protesters called it. They had a protest called the Stop the Slops protest. Here's a little segment from it.
The community is right. Sack Compass. 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 The community is right. You are not rent-a-crowd. You are people from our community, from Invercargill, from Southland, from Otago, from Dunedin. You are people that are in our hospitals, who have family members in our hospitals, and you want those family members to be looked after properly. Can I also say it's really hard on the staff who have to serve the meals, who have to make the meals, who have to work alongside and care for people in hospital with such terrible food being served. This is unhealthy, it's unsafe, and it's got to stop. And we know if we keep the pressure on, it will stop, and we'll go back to preparing local food in our great kitchen in Dunedin Hospital.
Our keffiyeh wearing protester there, showing that our Palestinian allies are on the side of humanity every single time. So yeah, they protested against the slops. Doctors came out, slammed it, saying it was unhealthy. Hospitals warned of significant risk to patients. But they didn't drop the contract. See, this is in 2018, this issue continued. That protest was in 2016. Here in 2018, they're still saying there's significant risk. Why didn't they just end this contract? Because they were stuck in a 15-year contract with Compass that National pressured them into. So this is from a couple of years ago in 2021. A Southern District Health Board member tried to tell the public that the board is locked into a 15-year contract that hasn't delivered any savings before he was shut down. Dr. John Chambers, who also works as a specialist at Dunedin Hospital's emergency department, was referring to the contract the board signed with Compass Group in 2016 to outsource all of its meals. He tried to blow the whistle on the fact that, guys, we've got an issue here. We're forced to stuck in this contract with terrible food for 15 years. And then the other board members quickly hushed him and shut down the meeting. They were like, no, remember that contract? We can't talk about it. So there's definitely something going on about them being sworn to secrecy around it, and respect to Dr. John Chambers for sticking his neck out for the people. In contrast, people who didn't get stuck in this 15-year contract, for example, in Canterbury, the Canterbury DHB, they used to be with this other contract prior to the push to make DHBs enter into a 15-year contract. They had a contract with Compass, and when it ended, they decided not to review it. They decided to go back to cooking their own food, and guess what happened? Better food, and saved millions of dollars. Surprise, surprise. So when you remove the profit margin, what happens? You can put that money back into the food, back into the service. It's not rocket science, Luxon.
Strengthens the public sector. Yeah. I mean, what I was listening to in her speech that she gave during the protest, right? It's like, oh yeah, the staff. How sorry I feel for the staff having to deal, like, I've been a patient in a hospital, and yeah, sometimes the food is awful, and it makes you disgruntled, grumpy. You can take it out on the staff. And just imagine for those patients, right? And they'll be thinking, oh, this food is shit. Maybe that's going to push them over the edge to enroll themselves in a private hospital. And what's that going to do? That's going to drop costs of the public hospital, and it's going to be putting additional profits into private hospitals.
Exactly. And it's that other thing of, like, I think I said this earlier, but if you're too poor to go to a private hospital, you deserve shit food, right? It's also part of that narrative. They don't want us to have nice things unless we are super rich. It's part of the class war. It's a part of keeping us downtrodden so that we can never climb up, right? Because communities providing food for themselves, they're empowering themselves as a community and relying less on the state, and they don't like that. So for Canterbury Health Authorities, taking over food services from Compass in 2017 made a substantial financial difference. They said it saved them millions of dollars, which brings into question the established practice of using private providers to supply hospital meals. Indeed it does. And that's the conversation that I wish we were having about the school lunches, is why don't we just invest in the schools to be able to provide it themselves, or next best thing, for a community organization, for local businesses, or a marae, which has been a proven model of providing mass-produced food at low cost, by the way. I think of all the possibilities, marae had the next cheapest one after Compass in terms of how much it costs them on average to make a school lunch. So we do have the infrastructure, right? Every marae you've ever been to has the infrastructure to feed hundreds of people. They're in every community. That would have been a great way to go for schools that don't have kitchens. So many options that we could have gone with. And I wish that was the conversation that we were having. It almost feels like, because I know how important food is, and I know how awful it is that they're making our schools suffer, but it's almost a distraction to just talk about the quality of the food and just stay stuck within that narrow realm of just talking about the quality of the food and not the bigger picture of privatization. So, just to prelude the next slide. Okay, remember how we said, am I? All right.
Yep, you're good.
Please do keep commenting so that I know that we're still streaming. Because last time, we just kept streaming when the stream stopped. So yeah, right, lots of comments. I also just love them. So remember how we said earlier in that John Campbell clip that Labour and New Zealand First formed this coalition with all these other groups saying, oh, Compass is terrible, we've got to get them out of our hospital. Okay, well, guess what Labour did in 2020 with their lunch school program? They provided one of their biggest, if not the biggest, contract for school lunches to the Compass group. They gave them a contract to feed 11,600 school children from Taranaki to Christchurch. This is in 2020, after Labour formed a coalition against the Compass group in our hospitals. They knew very well about all the drama. They were part of it. It was Annette King at the time for Labour, going on and on about how terrible this Compass group is. And then they give them the contract for school lunches in 2020. See, I didn't know that. I thought Compass came in with National, bringing in for school lunches. But once again, just like the fast track legislation, they're just expanding what Labour started. And I often find that that's the case with terrible proposals. Or, I shouldn't say, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but they definitely build on each other's shitty policies. And Labour has been part of that story in like everything that I'm researching.
Yeah, it's a sad thing, because it's like we trust Labour more. If they're introducing something and they've got a good narrative around it, it might be a little bit of a grey space, but it's
Exactly.
Labour introducing it. If it was National introducing it, maybe it would be a bit more cautious and wary, which is a reminder for us, right? When Labour is in power, it means we can't just chill out, often that happens. For me, there are all these things happening that Labour did, but I think we can probably criticize the left a bit in this regard.
Yeah.
When it is Labour who's falling short, and it's not just when Labour is falling short, but when any of our own are falling short, we tend to talk about it less. But we really do need to be critical. Labour is the establishment party, the other side of the coin of the National Party. Absolutely, I believe that they are there to work in tandem with one another, Labour and National. It's the other side of the coin. And so it makes sense that Labour plays the good cop, We're playing good cop, bad cop here. They break the ice. It's like they're the AstroTurf to the National Party.
Oh,
Don't want to sound like too much of a crazy conspiracy theorist, but it is true that they get away with breaking the ice with these controversial policies. And I think we need to be careful about that.
Yeah, and this is something that, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and we posted a video and some comments about it, but I do want to go into it just really quickly. But, with the fast track legislation, National's been saying for ages, the fast track legislation was based on Labour's. Labour did it first. Why are you complaining now? Labour did it first. And, I sort of didn't really look much into it until recently, after Chris Hipkins said, oh, yeah, well, he got asked, will you scrap the fast track legislation? And he said, well, we started the fast track legislation. We have no issues with fast tracking things. So I went to have a look at their fast track legislation, which was the COVID Recovery (Fast Track Consenting Act 2020. And it was a terrible legislation. It also got rid of democratic processes. It also got rid of necessary consultation abilities. It also got rid of safety mechanisms to protect us. Obviously, the new fast track legislation took it further, but Labour's one was also problematic. And, just to take one example of one fast track proposal that iwi opposed, it was the Kapunu Green Hydrogen Project, which is massive wind turbines to produce harmful synthetic fertilizer to produce urea. And for the first 5 years, they said that 100% of their energy is going to go into providing urea for themselves. It was an agri-balancer. If you've heard of them, they're a really terrible fertilizer company, big fertilizer company in New Zealand. So in their opposition to this hydrogen project, Te Korowai o Ngā Ruahine Trust wrote, quote, there have been serious misgivings about the entire fast-track consenting process under which this application is being processed. This has meant past and current Treaty of Waitangi settlements are in effect ignored. This is seen as a slap in the face to all those who fought with dignity and patience to secure settlement provisions capable of advancing the cultural, social, environmental, and economic well-being of Ngā Ruahine. Ngā Ruahine Hapu and Greenpeace then appealed the decision to grant the consent because they ignored their submissions. They took it to High Court, they took it to Court of Appeal, and they lost both times. Now they're saying that they're going to take the protest to the United Nations and try and humiliate New Zealand as their very last straw. Te Runanga o Ngāti Ruanui, likewise, also warned the expert panel that granted the consent for this hydrogen wind farm. They said you must be aware of the precedent effect it could be making through granting this application. So iwi and hapu they were warning us about Labour's fast track legislation and how it can create a precedent for future policies. And that's exactly what happened, right? National came in and expanded the fast track and made it much, much, much worse. And as Pere was saying, it's up to us to call it out and stop it in its tracks when Labour introduces these things. But the issue is, like you say, they've got a greater trust. And so when they bring in a legislation like this, a lot of people assume it's not going to be used for horrible things. It's probably just going to be used for housing. You know, that's what I genuinely thought. Silly. I'm naive, I know. But I genuinely thought they were just going to use it for extreme circumstances for COVID-19 infrastructure deficit and whatever was going on at the time. But it turns out they were also just helping big businesses like AgriBalance. And it turns out that they were destroying democratic processes. And it turns out that iwi was warning us that this was going to destroy their sacred lands and that this was going to lead to greater destruction of democracy. So as, leftists, we do need to do a better job of watching Labour and making it clear right then from the get-go, stopping things in their tracks so that it doesn't get to the point where National comes in and those things are already normalised, because National will only take those, run with it and make them worse. Like the school lunch program, they awarded it to companies with, quote, substantial number of complaints. And like we said before, New Zealand First was in the coalition against Compass Food when it came to hospitals back then. And now they're in this coalition and bringing back just like Labour, you know. So it doesn't matter how many times they know and how many reviews they have of Compass. They keep giving them contracts for some reason. And this is interesting. How do they justify giving it to a company that is renowned for its bad quality food? Well, they set out a weighing program for assessing meal providers tendering for the cut price model of ka ora ka ako. Menu quality and nutrition accounted for 15% of the total weighing, which was the same percentage given to waste minimization. So, as you can see, menu quality and nutrition was a very minimal factor, only worth 15% in their accounting for who to give the tender to. So clearly they prioritized cost over health and quality, and that's how they justified it. And just quickly on this, ka ora ka ako. Funny how they always keep the Te Reo Māori names for programs and things that they don't like and things that they want to scrap, right?
Yeah. Oranga tamariki. Yeah, that's got to be right, they said they're taking Te Reo names out of government institutions. Come on. They've only left it for the ministries or programs that they want to destroy or that they want to demonize. And yeah, classic, just playing on people's racism.
Yeah. That ka ora ka ako program is
that
probably
Māori
Māori
one?
run. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I hear it's doing really bad.
Company in the world. Okay. Documents also show officials repeatedly raised the risks related to providers, Libel and Compass for the alternative school lunch program, giving the high number of incidents and complaints about them. Okay, our government knows. Everyone in our government knows. National knew before they awarded it to them. It's not just because they're new ministers. Everyone's aware of the history, and so is our media. They're aware of this history, and they're not providing us with this history about Compass. Now, right. Back to Health Benefits Limited. So this terrible program that got put into hospitals was put there by that group, that Ponzi-like group that I mentioned earlier, Health Benefits Limited. Now, who was in Health Benefits Limited? There was one interesting name. At one stage, the deputy chair was Dr. Lester Levy. And before I get to Lester Levy, Tony Ryle, who was the health minister at the time, he's now the chief executive of Best Start Educare. Now, those of you who watch the show know that Best Start Educare is owned by the Wright family, They are an extremely wealthy family that receives hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money that they don't even pay tax on because of this weird loophole that they've got. And I just mentioned the story. Oh, and of course, the Wright family funds the Platform, which is a right-wing pro-National Act New Zealand First radio station. And the reason I mentioned the story is because I wanted to show the revolving door that we've got between government officials and corporations to give a window into why government officials might want to do so many pro-business things. It's not always outright open corruption. You know, we give you money, you give us something. Often it's just about maintaining a good reputation among the business community so that you can protect your post-government career, like Tony Ryle. And, you know, it's just, you know, it's ridiculous to me that you have this company led by a previous national minister that receives hundreds of millions of dollars of government money that then uses these tax-free government money to fund the Platform to support National. I mean, it seems corrupt to me. So back to Lester Levy, right? What did National do with Lester Levy, who ran this horrific Health Benefits Limited Ponzi scheme, who destroyed the food in our hospitals, who manipulated DHBs out of millions of dollars and then like didn't show them any benefits from it? Well, of course, National gave him Health Commissioner in 2024 when they came into power. And of course, he did the exact same thing he did last time. He said, oh, it's totally bloated. We have to cut costs from our public health. We have to cut it from a bureaucracy. They just made the exact same arguments the Health Benefits Limited said. And he's doing the exact same job that he did last time, cooking the books. In this case, he tried to move the current year's restructuring, including firing costs, to last year to make the former government's deficit year look worse than Lester Levy and Reti's year, the year after. And so, you know, that's the kind of stuff that they hire him for, to create the illusion of cutting costs while actually just transferring money around, transferring it into private corporations. In this particular case, it was stopped by the Attorney General, but that just clearly shows that they weren't meant to do that, that even the government is calling them out on it. And, you know, Lester Levy, he's been brought back to just cause havoc on the health system once again, despite doing, or not despite, but because he did such a good job at destroying our public health last time. Now, this article from Mountain Tui says you just follow the money in New Zealand's health privatization heist. And one of the figures that they touch on is the previous Health Commissioner Lester Levy's directorship, which is in a jointly owned private health company. So he has a directorship with a private health company. Of course, his interest is moving funds from public hospitals into private companies. And of course, he's going to try and restructure hospitals so that more money flows in that direction.
Absolutely.
And what's the impact of Lester Levy's cuts? It's horrible, right? Healthcare workers in a recent survey said that these cuts are damaging their services. 4 out of 5 of them said that the cuts and restructuring damage the services they deliver, with the PSA saying that this refutes the government's claims that the cuts won't affect the front line. Of course, Health New Zealand is trying to cut 660 million this year. They won't, and we'll find out later, but it'll be too late. Through voluntary redundancies, the consolidation of roles, and streamlining departments such as finance, HR, data, and digital and infrastructure investment. So from this PSA health worker survey, they say hiring restrictions mean that we're only able to run our national pediatric clinic at half capacity. This indirectly impacts children's access to timely health care. Cancer patients are not getting adequate diagnosis to help guide their drug regimen. We now have nurses and social workers covering receptionist duties, which takes them away from clinical duties. Consolidation. Cutting IT support is effectively cutting frontline healthcare. Of course, anyone who's ever worked anywhere knows that all the different positions, back room, front room, all need to be done. So if you're going to just cut the back room people, the front room people are going to go to do those jobs. blatantly
obvious. Yeah,
blatantly
crazy.
obvious.
And like just all of the issues that it caused, right? Like through all of this, if you're withholding people's pay and whatnot, you know, all of these people then having to go to court, spending money in the court
Yes.
system, chasing money that they are owed, you know, all of the complaints that must happen, the staff turnover that must increase when these workplaces are stressed in these ways. Like, it's just dismantling everything. It's just purposefully putting in this notoriously shit group to just take everything away from our public sector, to start funneling people reluctantly, but you know, they will start heading towards the private sector because they're just not getting looked after by the public sector.
Exactly. And you know, like Noam Chomsky says, you know, this is the classic move for privatization. Destroy something to the point where you say, oh, we've got to bring in a private company to do it. So they're doing that with our hospitals. And as you'll see, they're already admitting that that's what they're doing. They're destroying the hospital's ability to provide services for people so that then they can come in and be like, oh, well, I guess we're going to have to fund private corporations to do the job, instead of just investing in our hospitals to be able to do the job in the first place. And they're just openly admitting this. Here's a recent... Oh, no, before I jump to that, sorry. Before I jump to them admitting about privatization, I just wanted to touch on the response of the government to the PSA union. So they responded in the most childish way imaginable, with ad hominem personal attacks on Fleur Fitzsimmons, who's the secretary of the union. And honestly, I think it's one of the most pathetic, childish displays I've ever seen. I cannot believe this man-child, Simeon Brown, is our health minister. And listen as well for Chris Luxon's little giggle that he gives.
Talk about the record funding and health. You may have seen the survey from the PSA today, where the overwhelming response from health workers was that the frontline is suffering and that the Bancorp was cut 13 frontline services.
Well, look, that's from the PSA union, led by a failed Labour Party candidate who couldn't even win her safe Labour Party seat. Come on.
Come on.
Come on. And yeah, he just keeps going like that. And you can hear Luxon there giggling, just completely dismissing and discounting everything that the union is saying, everything that the workers, the most, you know, arguably the most important workers in our society, our healthcare workers, they are dismissing all of their complaints. And this, you know, it might look like an attack on Fleur Fitzsimmons, but it's actually an attack on our workers. It's dismissing, gaslighting, and showing that they are not going to even give 1 second of thought to the concerns of our healthcare workers. And who's supporting them in this narrative? Of course, it's Taxpayers Union. As we've talked about before, the purpose of Taxpayers Union and the Free Speech Union is just to create narrative support for whatever the government is doing and saying. That's their whole purpose. And so in this particular case, they're playing along with the government's attacks on Fleur Fitzsimmons, and they posted this saying, "Disinformation alert, public sector union promote myth about cuts to health spending." And they say, contrary to what the bureaucrats want you to think, health funding has actually increased under the current government.
Ugh.
Okay.
Terrible.
So the thing with this one is that
it's not a lie.
It might not be a lie.
Know?
It might not be a lie. And that's what I've been trying to communicate throughout this whole episode. It might very much be the case that the government spends even more money, but that money goes to private corporations instead of to our public health services. And that's the trick, right? So if we keep talking about, are they spending more money or less, we're going to lose sight of the bigger picture, which is where that money is going. They're not in the business of cutting money. They're in the business of transferring money from the public to the private realm. And they are absolutely admitting it now.
Today,
Here's
the
Samia.
Minister and Commissioner released details of what they described as a health reset, which amongst other goals includes getting back to budget by the middle of 2027, and the ambitious goal of getting more than 10,500 elective surgeries off the waitlist by June with the help of a $50 million cash injection.
We will work with the private sector. It's not just, it's a publicly funded, but we are open to different ways of delivering.
But after months of sharp cuts to health, those on the front line have questions.
We don't have enough operating theatres, we don't have enough anaesthetists, we don't have enough beds to look after our patients post-operatively.
Money a good start, but still a lot more is clearly required to get so many surgeries done in just 3 months.
Oh, they better push even more.
Yeah, I know, right? So, there's an interesting framing from One News. I should say predictable framing, but they avoided making it clear that this was just further privatization. They didn't make it explicitly clear that they are putting $50 million of taxpayer money into for-profit companies. And then at the end there, she says, the money is a good start, but we are going to need more, right? So the conversation, from the news's perspective, starts with them saying this is a good thing. And the only issue is, are we able to physically be able to provide this with a lack of infrastructure? They don't allow the conversation to widen out to, should we even be giving money, $50 million to for-profit corporations, when we could be investing that money in building up the capacity for hospitals to provide those services in the first place? And when we do that with hospitals, of course, it's a one-off payments that we make to build up their capacity, and then that's it. But with private corporations, you're going to have to pay them with that profit margin forever to provide those services. That's why you say, give a man a fish and he'll feed his family for a day. Give a man a fishing rod, whatever that saying is, and he'll be able to fish for life, or whatever it is, right? So
pretty good reciting of that whakatauki for a vegan. Pretty good for a vegan.
Yeah, you can tell us vegans, we don't usually go for that one, but I think it applies in this situation. Give people the means to provide the services for themselves, and it will be more sustainable and cheaper in the long run, right? So these conversations, they're not bridged on the news. They say it's a good start, and they don't highlight very clearly that our taxpayer money is going to line for-profit corporations' pockets.
It was a bad report. Glossing over the privatization aspect and just saying, oh, it's ambitious, and kind of insinuating that they need to go even harder and spend even more money. And Simeon is just brushing off the conversation around privatization. He doesn't have the conversation. He says it like, oh, no, we're not afraid of privatization like laborers.
Yeah.
Privatization's not a boogeyman to us.
Yeah, like they're brave.
Just gaslighting us. Yeah, like they're brave. Like, oh, wow, we should be patted on the back for chartering this new territory. But, have the conversation. Address the criticisms.
If you're not afraid
of privatization.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're not scared to have the conversation, then have the conversation. Don't just sneakishly destroy the hospital ability to provide those surgeries and then say, we have no choice but to let these businesses do the job, because apparently businesses do a better job than people. Okay, Taxpayers Union again, attacking Fleur Fitzsimmons again, and I really...
Just backing up the government narrative, right?
Yeah.
Just piling it on.
Yeah, exactly. And creating the justification for the government to ignore the union. This was from 21st of February, so that was even before Simeon Brown's attack that we saw earlier. And I think this is I think that this alone should discredit the Taxpayers Union for life. And I think the fact that the media takes them seriously after they post, of course, all the racist and ridiculous things that they post, but this example is just so stupid. It's just so stupid. I mean, let's just read through it. So this is what they write in their unhinged, extremely long rant. Fleur Fitzsimmons should resign or be sacked. The Taxpayers Union is calling on the Public Service Association to sack its acting national secretary after she publicly suggested women, Māori and Pacifica people are incapable of high performance and should therefore have pay increases automatically applied. Suggesting that Māori, Pacifica and women are incapable of high performance belongs in the 17th century, not the modern public service, says famous anti-racist activist Jordan Williams.
Sounding awfully woke.
We must all call out racism and sexism when it occurs, especially in the trade union movement. We are disgusted that such stereotypes are being used to suggest performance pay rises will see women, Māori and Pacifica people miss out. At the Taxpayers Union, we are baffled that anyone in 2025 would suggest that sex or race make people less capable. Either Fleur Fitzsimmons is a bad egg or there's something deeply wrong with the culture at the PSA. Fleur Fitzsimmons' comments are publicly demeaning and condescending. If the PSA won't act, the government should, by refusing to engage with a failed Labour Party candidate with these extreme views. And that, my friends, is the point of this whole entire rant and all their attacks on Fleur Fitzsimmons is to justify the government not engaging with the union. And in this particular case, it's an obvious lie. It's an obviously disprovable lie, and that's why I say it should discredit them in the media. Honestly, the media makes a mockery out of themselves when they take the Taxpayers Union seriously. So what did Fleur Fitzsimmons actually say? She said a step away from step-based pay system to a performance pay or discretionary pay system will lead to discrimination against women, Māori and Pacifica people. Not it will lead to them not getting a pay because they're bad at their job because they're inherently inferior. No. She's saying it will lead to discrimination. The wrong is at the hands of the employers who divvy out pay increases in a discriminatory way. And the Taxpayers Union flipped that, outright lied, and said that she said a move towards discretionary pay would impact women because they would be incapable. She specifically said it would cause discrimination, which means they're treated unfairly for the same work, for the same performance as their white male peers. That's what she was saying, and anyone with two brain cells can understand that. And even beyond that, even the guy, Brian Roche, who's trying to bring back this performance or discretionary pay increases into the public service, even he admitted that tenure-based progression has been useful for, quote, reducing unjustified pay gaps through removing discretion in remuneration decisions. So he says unjustified pay gaps. These pay gaps aren't because Māori women in Pacifica are incapable, as the Taxpayers Union said Fleur Fitzsimmons was saying. No, he agrees with Fleur Fitzsimmons that they were experiencing unjustified pay gaps despite their performance being equal to those who got paid more than them. I'm just going to put them side by side now because, it's just so blatantly stupid, folks. Taxpayers Union, she publicly suggested women, Māori and Pacifica are incapable of high performance and should therefore have pay increases automatically applied, says the Taxpayers Union. Reality, any move away from a step-based system to a performance pay or discretionary pay will lead to discrimination. So they're either thick, they're either really stupid, or they're corrupt. They're lying. They're misrepresenting. They're manipulating, and they're astroturfing support for the National Party's policies. And that's obviously what they are. I don't believe they're just stupid and misunderstood. It's the classic thing of turning the argument against discrimination, turning the argument for equality to what they say is racism. It's just this government's whole entire shtick this whole time since they've come in, right? They've said, oh, all reparation type things, all things that are trying to remove discrimination against Māori, that's racist. That's racist. No. And you know, this narrative, by the way, we also need to put it in context that this narrative was perfected in places like apartheid South Africa, like in America, when talking about reparations for slavery. They would tell them, oh, you guys are being racist against white people for asking for reparations. You guys are being racist against white people for asking for basic rights in apartheid South Africa. And then this is just an extension of that argument, and you see it a lot these days. Oh, you're saying you need us to even the playing field, so you're saying that you're inherently inferior. So they turn the argument for equality into us being racist. And it's someone gave me a term once on one of our videos, and they called it colonial mirroring. I like to call it projection. I think everything that they do and say is just pure projection. And I think, you know, this example from the Taxpayers Union, clear projection. They say, you know, oh, can't believe anyone would think anyone is less than another. It's clear you guys think that a lot of us are lesser than a certain archetypal person that you've got in your brain. They say she thinks that they're incapable of high performance. They obviously think that. That's why they think that they deserve the discriminatory pay that they get, and they want to go back to that because they think they deserve to be paid less. They think they are being paid for their performance, and their performance is bad. You know, so it's pure projection. And then, you know, oh, can't believe in 2025 anyone would suggest that sex or race would make people less capable. Come on, these guys are like the biggest TERFs in the world. They are like the biggest Zionists in the world. They support the destruction of lives of brown indigenous people here and abroad. And they're saying that, you know, it's just, they're clearly projecting. And these are the groups that, you know, like I said earlier, Brooke Van Velden, she'll meet with the Taxpayers Union. These idiots, these morons, these absolute thick, stupid morons, she'll meet with them, but not real unions that represent hundreds of thousands of people.
Just continuing the grift.
Yeah, and, you know, as long as the media presents them like a respectable, normal group, they will continue to have influence. But seriously, how can you read this? How can you read these attacks and think, oh yeah, this group is reasonable, they've got some good ideas? I mean, I genuinely, help me out here. I genuinely cannot fathom how anyone would look at this misrepresentation of reality and think the Taxpayers Union is legit.
I don't know, you know, just a lot of people not paying that close attention. They will just hear what the taxpayers have said and they say, oh, did she say that? Oh, yeah, technically that sounds racist. And, you know, they'll get that kind of soundbite and they won't hear the alternative side. You know, these people subscribe to Taxpayers Union, ACT Party, etc., etc. They'll see those types of headlines from them, you know, confirmation bias, you know, and those messages are just going out to their people. But
that's true. As
you say, yeah, the media still takes groups like Taxpayers Union seriously. And it reminds me of a poll that's just come out recently.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Talking about mayors and the popularity of mayors in their various electorates. And Moko Te Pānia, the mayor of the far north, he was at the top. And I was like, okay, yep, that looks legit. That looks legit. Oh, by the way, you know, this poll was done by Taxpayers Union, Curia Market Research, the market research group that removed themselves from the only professional body that was holding standards for the profession, right? They removed themselves because they weren't living up to those standards. They shouldn't be taken seriously for their breaches in that respect, because they had various professional breaches, complaints upheld against them. But anyway, so Moko Te Pānia, he's number one, he's at the top, and you're like, okay, cool, this looks legit. And then you see Craig Jepson, the infamous kaipara racist who banned karakia at his first council meeting. He was number 3. And the funny thing was that the Taxpayers Union in their poll did report that there was a margin error of 9.6.
Wow, that's
for Craig Jepson. And so clearly possible that they may have just cooked up those numbers with a 9.6 margin for error. I think, I can't remember the numbers, but they gave him something like a 30-point score. And so could more realistically have been something like a 20-point score.
Yeah.
And of course, you look into the methodology of how they got those numbers, and the vast majority was done by phone call. And of course, phone calls, you're more likely to answer or have a landline phone call, a phone, to be in the phone book if you own a property, if you are someone who owns a house, which is, that's on the more wealthy end of the spectrum, more on the national voter end of the spectrum, more on the end of the spectrum who tends to have some of these racist, deep-seated beliefs.
Older people too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's those things that keep the Taxpayers Union relevant, because we see the poll and we say, oh, look, Moko Te Pānia is at the top. This is some good news. We'll share that. And then Curia Market Research, of course, is able to say, oh, this is how many times we were referenced or used in mainstream media articles this year. Therefore, look how relevant, look how legitimate we are, because we're being used by One News, RNZ, the Northern Advocate, all of them. And so, we just need to be reminded, right? As soon as you see Taxpayers Union, Curia Market Research, understand that it's an AstroTurf group. They don't represent the interests that they say they represent. In fact, it's usually the exact opposite. And that we shouldn't be legitimizing these groups. We shouldn't be sharing their polls. And they're going to come out, like a lot of polls are going to come out from Curia Market Research. And sometimes they will say, oh, look, the Greens are up in the polls today. They might tell the truth here and there.
Yeah.
They might tell the truth here and there. But every now and again, when the messaging and when the timing is ideal for them, they'll put out a particular poll, and maybe you won't know until you look deep in it that the margin of error is off, and they might say in that poll that, oh, look, Brooke Van Velden is going to win again. And so then, of course, all of those people on the fence who were umming and ahhing of whether or not they were going to vote for Brooke Van Velden, they're going to see that poll result, and that poll result is going to be published everywhere because we've legitimized them as a legitimate polling group. And yeah, that's how they do it. They just take that opportunity. And so we really need to try our best to not legitimize, not to share those articles, and to remind our media groups that these companies don't have any legitimacy and that we shouldn't be leaning on them.
Tautoko. I was trying to go back to something.
Oh, Kapai, where are we going?
It's doing a weird thing.
Oh, technical difficulties.
Maybe don't bother going back. Don't bother going back. I was just going to say that in that same post that I showed from the Taxpayers Union with them saying fake news, they went on and on about how the PSA survey can't be trusted. And they were like criticizing how the polling technique wasn't proper, and they were like, we could never get away with doing improper polling techniques. The media would just completely reject us if we did that. And again, it's just another blatant, clear projection because they have failed professional polling standards, and the media still uses their polls, and they know that. And so they're projecting that onto the PSA, and I think it's hilarious. One of the things about their polls is that because they are majority phone call based, and they're always that way, they're always vast majority phone call based, they're going to get that older, more right-wing population polling, and that creates the illusion that the right-wing parties have a greater vote. And as we know, people like to be part of the winning team.
Yeah, good
and
point.
So often the Taxpayers Union will say National's doing great in the polls, and it'll be a lot better than what they actually were doing if they were to test it properly, with more online surveying, for example. And it creates this illusion that National has more support than they do, which creates greater support for them, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So yeah, the phone call thing, I think that's a big thing.
Yeah.
I think it's
and like, who's got time to take a survey?
we don't have a phone call.
Yeah, we don't have a landline, right? But who's got time to take or do a survey? If you're in poverty, if you're experiencing poverty, a survey about your poverty is like, and if you're in poverty, you're less likely to trust the system. You're less likely to trust that your feedback is going to be going anywhere that's actually useful. And like you say, it's good to be on the winning team, right? The establishment and those who benefit from the establishment, they want to stay on the winning team. So they're happy to contribute to these surveys, which they may know is skewed in their favor. You know, if I get Curia Market Research calling me up, would I do the survey? Oh, that's an interesting question. Would I do the survey? I don't know. I wouldn't want to legitimize it. But, you know, it's that kind of thing. You know, if a polling company calls you up, if you're someone like me who doesn't like the government, then you're probably just going to hang it up straight away. But if you're someone who thinks the government is doing a great job, then they'll be happy to spend a bit of time there saying how awesome National is.
Yeah.
Or how awesome Craig Jepson is.
Yeah. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And with that poll result as well, another weird thing that happened is headlines started being made about Aotearoa Mayor, Tepania. Something. And
on the tip of the tongue.
Yes, anyway, the mayor of Rotorua, Tanya Tapsell, who is a horrible right-wing conservative. She's like a part of the National Party.
She tried to run for a national electorate, didn't make it in. And
all of her decisions so far have been really bad for the community and really right-wing oriented and, you know, really anti-Māori and anti-people in poverty. And she was like, you know, low on their list of, you know, mayors. I don't know where she was down. I can't remember the number exactly, but for some reason they made headlines with her picture and they said, this mayor got the highest result in this area.
Yeah.
It was like New Plymouth or something, or, you know, the highest mayor in this area. I can't remember what the geographic
Central North Island or something like that
location was. But then you look at the list and she's like all the way down number 7 or 8 or something, but they still found a way to generate positive headlines about someone that they liked instead of Moko.
So they created a particular group demographic for her. And they probably just created that particular demographic so that she could be at the top of that demographic and then report on it.
Yeah, and have headlines with her face on it. Okay, so back to the Taxpayers Union and the government. Why are they attacking unions? Why are they attacking healthcare workers who are trying to tell us they need help? They're trying to cry out to the public. We need you to support. Why are they attacking them? Why are they attacking Fleur Fitzsimmons? It's because they don't want us to talk about this. They want to detract from the fact that our public health system is in real trouble and it's due to their moves of cutting funding direct to our public health and putting it into private corporations. It's because of Lester Levy, who was previously in Health Benefits Limited, coming back in and again destroying our public health system. They want to distract from all of that. They want to distract from the horrible situation our hospitals are in, and the fact that Christchurch Hospital has 120 nurses less than recommended. They want to distract from the fact that a number of children being abused in state care has increased. This is all related to the cuts. If you make cuts to
foundational services
and people get hurt, people die, you know, we're talking about our most vulnerable sector of society, people who are sick in hospital, people who need operations, children who are in state care, and you're cutting funding from the front line to be able to do that. You know, in the Oranga Tamariki situation, children abusing each other and hurting each other because there's not enough staff to be keeping an eye on things. Even staff being pushed to their limits because of their workload and ending up abusing children. These are all a result of these cuts, and these are the serious things they want to distract us by oh, Fleur Fitzsimmons, Labour, ooh, blah, blah, blah. It's just, you know, distraction, methods, and personal attacks to detract from these extremely serious conversations that they should be talking about and resolving. But instead, him and Luxon laughing at Fleur Fitzsimmons. I haven't seen anything like it. This country is a bit of a joke at the moment.
Kia ora.
But I wanted to end on a slightly positive note, that the people are resisting. Just yesterday, Oranga Tamariki staff walked off their job over workloads. They said that they received an insulting and unimaginable workload, and around 2,800 Oranga Tamariki staff are striking. They said that they're going to strike from 28th of February to 18th of April, which includes a ban on all unpaid work, including using work systems and software outside of work hours, a ban on working double shifts and overtime, and a ban on being on call. Now, in that same article, the union itself says our workers do not like to strike. They haven't taken a strike in a long time, Oranga Tamariki staff, even though they often get dealt the worst cards from our public services. And on top of it, their service is demonized all the time because of chronic underfunding and structural issues that are not the workers' faults. They don't like to take strikes because they know it impacts their vulnerable children that they work with, but they have been pushed to their absolute limit, to the point where they're having to do this and they don't want to. And so this is meant to be a positive.
Yeah.
Which is that our people are resisting. They're protesting, and as you saw throughout my story, our people have been protesting, hospital workers and their supporters have been protesting all of these years.
And it's not for nothing. But yeah, as you said, a positive story. It's such a shame, of course, that our people have to do this. But it's absolutely necessary. And it's not for nothing. You know, all of the protest movements that we talked about tonight, the Dunedin Hospital movement, just look at that huge protest that did happen recently in Dunedin. Our earlier protests all lead into bigger protests. So, you know, get it moving now. As we move into the election, we really need the truth, people's real feelings to be reflected. As these Oranga Tamariki staff say, they don't want to do this because they know how important their mahi is to just stay in that space and do the mahi. But without protests, without these loud voices speaking up, the truth is not reflected in terms of how much stress is being put on our public services. So don't feel disheartened. You know, it feels like we've been in Groundhog Day looking at all these protests happen already, but, you know, everything like this does have a cumulative effect. And as we're moving into elections, we're able to reflect on all of these accumulations, and we're able to use them to help to hold the government to account. So although I feel a lot of aroha for our workers who are doing it tough and who are having to get out there and protest, you know, absolutely shouldn't be having to do that. But I applaud each and every one of you. And for those who are able to do protest and things like that, I highly recommend that you do it. You can start really small, but it doesn't matter how small it is. It's still putting the voice out there and creating some momentum that can be used as a foothold for future asks and stronger movement building. So depending on what sector you're in, if something isn't already happening in terms of a protest movement, have a think about it in terms of how you can contribute, because yeah, it does all add up. And if we all start reflecting what is the truth and saying it loud, it's going to be amplified, and it's going to give our good politicians in the House and all of our good people outside of government doing good work a foothold to jump from. So kia kaha, everyone who's thinking in those ways of protest. It all adds up, and it's inspiring our rangatahi. It's inspiring the next generation. It's letting people know that it is worth speaking up, that there are people that love this country, who believe in this country, who believe in our people and know that our people deserve better. And it definitely gives me hope, and it fills me up and gives me strength seeing others protest, and it makes me want to give even more energy when I'm protesting. And of course, you know, I don't want to say it's all about protests, you know, just people working in difficult spaces is protest. So just to all of you who are just holding in, you know, I mihi to you as well. But absolutely anything that we can do to reflect what is happening, I really do encourage it.
Kia ora. Kia ora. And, you know, if I could just add one thing to our conversation today, yes, the bigger conversation is about how do we enable our public services to be able to provide the proper services befitting of the 7th richest country in the whole entire world, and how to keep the money in the hands of the public instead of going to profit generating private corporations. But there is another big picture conversation to be had here, which is, why do things cost so much in the first place? You know, why are we funding these public services with so much money and yet they're still struggling? Why are they spending so much money and yet we still have terrible services? And the answer to that question lies in more structural issues, like the way that we've enabled landlords to own so many properties and charge us ridiculous amounts. And that extremely high rent means we have to spend most of our income on rents, leaving us with not much money to live by. And these public services that have to rent their buildings have to deal with that same issue. They have to pay extremely high rental costs, and year after year after year they go up, and the government allows them to go up, but then they're not increasing the funding for our public service to align with that increase. And I think, you know, we do need to be talking about how come things cost that much in the first place? How come New Zealand has one of the most expensive property prices and one of the most expensive food prices in the world, especially when we're a food developing country?
Producing. Yeah.
Especially when we're a food producing country. That's our whole thing. We produce food, we export 90% of the food that we produce. That's how much food we produce. And yet we have, I think, the most expensive food in similar countries, in comparable nations. And those are the structural issues underlying all of this, because you know, like the fact that parents cannot afford to feed their children is because food is so expensive in the first place. The fact that we have to pay so much to get a decent meal together, like the $3 a meal that Compass is doing should be able to pay for just a really good healthy meal that the school can buy. But instead we have only two giant monopolies that control our entire supermarket, our entire food market. Just two companies. So they're able to just keep raising the costs, keep raising the costs. And that means we have to fund more in our public services to be able to keep up with these costs. And it means that we have to keep putting things like lunches in schools because people can't afford to buy food from the supermarket. And in the end, all of that is also transferring money from the public realm to the private realm, right? If we have to increase funding for our public health because their rents have increased, because corporations are extorting them ridiculous prices for food, rent, medical items, for medicine, you know, the pharmaceutical corporations that are allowed to set ridiculous prices for medicines, they are the reason that we need to spend so much on our health services in the first place. So, of course, I will advocate for doing what we can now, right now, to solve the issues, to fund proper healthy school lunches and to fund proper health services so that we can have the health services that this country needs. Of course, I'll advocate for that. But at the end of the day, we do need to have those bigger questions of why do we allow corporations, private corporations, to charge so much for things such that it's hard to even keep up with public services. And you know, the answer is obviously we have to publicly own everything. We need publicly owned pharmaceutical company, publicly owned properties, publicly owned services.
And so this is why we need to popularize communism. Communism, yay. I mean, you know, ultimately we're having a conversation about capitalism. And this is why we've been so excited by Te Pāti Māori, because one of the only parties that's actually been wanting to have those big, brave conversations. Taku Te Where's one of the only MPs that actually has been saying this scary C word. I think Chloe has been bringing up capitalism and capitalism critique. But yeah, it's just our minor parties who are bringing up those conversations. So if you're stuck in between that blue-green seesaw, you know, have a look at some of the minor parties. They have, you know, and especially Te Pāti Māori. They're not just the party for Māori. Their policies are actually amazing. If you're wondering about, you know, what do they actually have to offer, have a look, because it's actually really impressive, and they have a lot of policy that the Greens could learn from as well. So highly recommend. And yeah, as you say, we have to have those brave conversations. At the moment, everything is so surface level. The government just wants to gaslight, deflect, detract. But you know, it needs to happen. Like, these big, brave conversations really do need to happen. But it's not going to be the politicians who are leading out those conversations.
We have to normalize those narratives.
But like, we're treating our politicians like the conscience of the nation kind of thing. Or like, we celebritize them way too much, our politicians. They're meant to be representing us at the end of the day. But at the moment, it's almost like, not like we live in a dictatorship, but their words hold way too much weight.
Yeah.
And the narratives that they are creating are being laid over all of us and are dictating our conversations, really.
Yeah. And much of that has to do with the media framing. Like, you know, Luxon or Seymour will say something and the headline will be with a quote of what they said. And the narrative is framed around what they said. And, you know, when it's their job to fact check and to seek out alternative perspectives so that we can make up our mind, they will just effectively publish what the government has said as like a press release, more or less. And yeah, it's presented as fact, even though we have so much evidence that the government often misrepresents and manipulates things. But yeah, as long as we allow private corporations to set costs for whatever it is, we're never going to be able to keep up, even when it comes to funding our public services. And all of these things, funding our public services with extra money while corporations charge ridiculous extortionate prices, is actually just transferring taxpayer money to corporations. Even, you know, things like giving an extra extra subsidy if you take your child to childcare. There are certain subsidies that you only get if you give these subsidies only apply if you put your child in childcare, right? They're not just going to give it to you use the money as you want. You might choose as a mother or a father or you know, a parent to use that money,
take time off work,
to stay at home and look after your own child. That doesn't suit them. They want that money to go to a private corporation. So what they do is they give you credits for taking your child to childcare center. What does that mean? That means our public taxpayer money went directly to the private company without giving that choice to the parent to begin with. So these are all the sorts of sneaky ways, and you might think, you know, putting money into something like that sounds good to us, and maybe in the short term we do need some things like that, like I was saying, but in the long term we have to stop the underlying issue by just not letting corporations dictate the price of things that we rely on to live, if I could summarize what I'm saying. If we rely on them to live, then we should have complete control over them because we rely on them to live. And you know, and the fact is that they've given that power, the power of providing our sustenance, our basics of life to private corporations that can set the prices for them. That's the underlying issue here.
Kia ora, kia ora. And I just respond to one of our good friends who's been leaving some lovely comments, all good. And to everyone else who's been leaving comments, thank you all.
Thank you.
Fears around communism. You know, it's easy to demonize. You know, we live in the West. We live in a capitalist society, right? So anyone who's operating under a slightly different model, they get demonized. And, you know, when we talk about capitalism, we don't automatically think, oh, what about American capitalism? That's evil. We shouldn't do that, you know? But that's the same way we often think about communism. Just because someone else is doing it somewhere bad doesn't mean we have to replicate that exact mode of communism. And, you know, when I talk about communism, I'm only talking about us owning our own means of production. You know, that's all I'm really talking about. Us being in control of our own work, us having self-sufficiency, us having what we need for circular economies. Going back to basics is what I mean when I talk about communism.
Yeah, and you know, what I look to, I think what we look to as examples of communism is like pre-colonial society. We don't go to
Yeah, we don't need
Stalin
to look.
to think about communism. We just look at here before they came and brought colonization here. Maori didn't have a thing called private ownership. Land was communally looked after.
Kia ora.
People had a place to exist and stand on the land just by mere virtue of being a human being. Not that you have to buy a land so you can stand and exist. Not that you have to own money to merely exist in the society. You just have that as an inherent right. The land belongs to everyone because everyone belongs to the land. That's what we're talking about when we talk about communism, but we like to use the word because, you know, it pisses off the right wingers. And I think we just need to own it, you know? Just need to own it. Just call ourselves radical Māori communists and be done with it. And that's what Winston Peters has been warning about all along because he knows. He knows where radical Māori activism gets us. And that's, you know, destroying, hopefully, these structures of private overlords that own our basic...
The individualism.
Yeah, that own our basic means of life.
Ka pai. I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But as well, you know, just to wrap up the lunch kōrero. We love our sidetracks, eh? But for me, it's a clear sign of just wanting... we're repeating ourselves, so just for my own summary. It's to destroy the public system, to have people remove themselves from it, which is going to cut costs of the public sector anyway. And like you said, with all of those relationships of those in the private sector having relationships and connections with various politicians, it moves that money out of the public space and into the private space.
Yeah. And yes.
Shameful.
I will address that comment. I did see Winnie on work, his new anti-DEI thing.
Oh,
and
man.
I think actually Mikey Sherman on One News had a good take on that. He just got, I guess, humiliated by Phil Goff dissing Trump. And he's about to go hang out with Trump soon. Winnie has a meeting with Trump.
Right.
And so he just put this
So to say something
tweet out
ego.
to try and like make himself look like a friend of Trump and to have something under his belt when he goes to see him. So that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I think so.
But just in general, I mean, that aside, it's just, it just goes to show that this is a global movement that we're dealing with. The right wing have decided their narratives and they're going to run with it. And so for us, as kaitiaki of our countries, for us, we need to think about how do we respond to this direction that we can see very clearly and plainly ahead of us. We can see what right-wing governments are doing around the world, and we can think about what are our next steps. And I think, you know, yes, it is a little bit overwhelming, I guess, to see the fact that these things have been repeating all these years. But in another sense, I find it comforting because these attacks are not new. This is not some alien government that's, you know, popped up out of nowhere with no history and nothing. No, it's actually just the same that we've been dealing with since the day colonization began. And
prior.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, with these even as far as to go the specific tactics and the specific companies and the specific language that they use, it's just, you know, a continuum. So we don't need to sort of respond by freaking out. We can respond by making reasoned analysis and responses based on a very long-standing situation, and we can think a little bit long-term. We're not going to get rid of this government. We're not going to get rid of all their policies, and we're obviously not going to stop them from doing anything they want. We tried. We tried with the fast track bill. We tried with the treaty principles bill that they, you know, didn't take to select committee and so on and so forth. We should still keep protesting, absolutely, because as Pere said, it's about building our capacity. But I think we just need to remember that goal and keep that goal in mind, that it's a bit more of a long-term goal of building up our protest capacity. A bit of a more of a long-term goal of how do we start now to advocate for the political parties that we want. And, you know, even beyond that, to think for the next election, after the next election, and just think about
Just
our
in
broader
history
strategy.
and our broader strategy. It's the right thing to do, you know, for us to speak up and tell the truth. That's what it is at the end of the day. We need to tell the truth. We need to reflect out into reality what our experience is, so that everyone else can know what we are going through, you know, so that we're not all feeling gaslit. You know, we need to know that others are struggling as well. We need to tell that truth. We need to put it out into the world. If we don't put that out into the world, then the politicians are filling that void saying, oh no, everything is fine. Look, everything is great. Look, there is more money being spent in the health sector. Stop complaining because we already put more money in there. So, you know, they have the mainstream media to broadcast their perspectives and their narratives. So we all as well need to be making sure that we are putting out our narratives too, because it's going, you know, nothing can exist without influencing everything around it. You know, don't feel like you're insignificant and that what you're doing has no impact. You know, I only exist the way that I do because of everything that is around me influencing me. You know, don't think that you're so small and insignificant. None of us are. And when we all start waking up and speaking our truth and realizing how strong we are, you know, there's more of us than there is of them, you know. So kia kaha, everyone. You know, what can we do to strategize and to think broad picture? Well, I think for most of us, it's just hold on. Just hold on, keep going as you are, keep your integrity, keep your smarts, keep your class, keep your prestige. Don't let them tear us down. Just keep going as you are. Kia mau, hold strong, because we have a lot of amazing people in this country who are working incredibly hard for the benefit of all of us. You
With
know?
no thanks, absolutely. Oh, that's a beautiful thing to say. I think a good point to hopefully leave it at. Look after yourselves, look after your community, because at the end of the day, it's our communities that are gonna get us through this, you know. When it all falls down, it's our community that's gonna look after us. You know, when a cyclone hits, it's your local marae that's gonna house you. When there's, you know, no food around, it's your local organizations that you go to pick up boxes from. So don't wait until that moment when you need their help. Seek out those community groups and see how you can support them, even if it's in a really, really small way, even if it's just volunteering 1 hour a week, whatever it is. Work on your communities, or, you know, if you're a parent, love your children, raise your children, protect your family, and that's amazing activism in itself.
Call in on your friends. Yeah. And if anyone knows a hairdresser.
He keeps playing with his head.
My hair just does not sit properly. Anyway. Have a good night, everyone. Have a good week. But yes, enjoy the rest of your night.
What's today? Sunday?
Yep.
Work day tomorrow, everyone.
Kia kaha.
Kia kaha, kia kaha.
But yeah, call in on your loved ones. Check in on your mates and your friends, your work colleagues, because there's a lot of people doing it tough at the moment. But stay positive. The horizon is just over the horizon. The new dawn is just over the horizon. So hold on, e hoa ma. We can do this. We got this.
Kia ora rā. Good night, everyone. Thanks for